So we're a completely non-generic orchestra with a non-generic name. We call ourselves PostClassical Ensemble, and it's always a challenge to tell people what we are and what we do and why we call ourselves that. Post-classical music is a term that I coined in the 1980s, and I felt the necessity to come up with a term to replace classical music. Classical music is a poisonous term. And when I wrote my book, Classical Music in America, A History of Its Rise and Fall, I felt the need to figure out when that term came into existence and what it meant. So I've decided to blame it on John Sullivan Dwight, who was the most important music critic in the mid-19th century in Boston. And Dwight was a snob. And when he coined this term, classical music, what he meant by classical music was the supreme stratum of musical experience, better than popular music. So we've been burdened with this definition ever since. And today, it's become, I think, completely impractical and insidious unless it's used historically to refer to something that went on a long time ago. Nobody's invented a good term to replace it, but my term, for better or worse, is post-classical music. What's post-classical music? It's a broader and more variegated musical landscape that includes popular music and vernacular music and indigenous music, as well as what we used to call classical music. That's what we need to embrace today if we're not going to be John Sullivan Dwight and make these distinctions, these hierarchical distinctions between classical music and other music, which are no longer acceptable to us. So we embrace that term and what it implies, which is to say that many of our concerts do indeed incorporate vernacular music, indigenous music, popular music. Our forthcoming concert, May 10, includes a Mexican popular singer singing songs from the Mexican Revolution. When we did our Lou Harrison concert, we included a gamelan, an Indonesian gamelan, because he's a big influence on Harrison. And we'll return to Harrison, because he's a composer that we believe in. When we did our program called The Song of the Earth, which contextualized the last movement, the Abschied of Mahler's Song of the Earth, which was itself inspired by Chinese poetry and music, that concert included an erhu player and a pipa player. I might add that the pipa player, Min Xiaofen, is one of the artists with whom we're most closely associated. She's a demonic genius. She plays Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, bluegrass, as well as classical pipa and Western classical music using pipa. We will eventually, in 1516, present the world premiere of a commissioned concerto for pipa and chamber orchestra by Daniel Schnieder. Schnieder is also a post-classical artist. He's a Swiss-American composer who lives in Harlem. Very, very well-trained European composer who knows how to write for orchestra, but also powerfully influenced by jazz, by music of Africa, music of China. He's a voracious composer who incorporates, but authentically assimilates, but thoroughly, the music of other cultures. So we've decided that he's the guy who's needed to write an adequate concerto vehicle for an artist such as Min Xiaofen. They're post-classical musicians. We're a post-classical ensemble.